I'd like to introduce our next speaker, John Duchi, Assistant Professor of Statistics and Electrical Engineering.
Okay.
His work focuses on large-scale optimization problems arising out of statistical machine learning problems, robustness and uncertain data problems.
Okay, thanks for the chance to get to speak to all of you. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about privacy and machine learning under privacy, things like this. Okay, let's jump in. So I'm going to start off by giving a little bit of motivation. Probably you guys already have motivation for privacy, but let's just jump in. So suppose I wanted to release some kind of counts of microarray data. So what's a microarray? A microarray is you get a big population of people, you measure gene expression levels, and you put little marginal counts. So here, got gene 1, gene 2, gene 3, and then 5 people had gene 1 expressed, 3 people had gene 2 expressed in your data set, things like this. And you might think, okay, if I had a data set like this, I took everybody's data, added them all together, and released just the total counts across the data set, that should be fine. Right, now suppose an insurance company comes and says, hey, I wonder if this guy, Jim, or if John was in this data set of, say, very healthy people. Okay? And we know that everybody in my study, say, had this, can you guys see the mouse here? Yeah, had this last gene. Well, if these were my genes, maybe I was in the study. If these were my genes, probably I was in the study. If these were my genes, I was definitely not in the study because I don't have, this last gene expressed. Right, so it turns out, actually, Niels Homer, who's a sort of statistical biologist, he did this study and he figured out he could, just based on data that the NIH was releasing, he could find people, identify them in studies. And actually this caused the National Institutes of Health to stop releasing genetic data for several months in the early 2010s, or just before 2010. All right, so that's kind of a little issue. Here's another thing I read yesterday. It's a headline in the New York Times. It turns out there's a warrant in Florida that basically opens up all of your consumer DNA sites to police agencies snooping around and trying to figure out, are you in them? Okay, here's my favorite privacy example. So you guys remember the Netflix prize? Who remembers the Netflix prize? Anybody remembers it? Okay, yeah. So Netflix said, oh, okay, we'll give $1 million if you guys can improve our recommendations by 10% or something like this. Right, and so all these teams worked on it, and it was successful. And then, it went so well, Netflix thought, let's do another one of these. Okay, we're going to have another Netflix prize where we give you a little bit more data. All right, then this happened, right? So Netflix spilled your Brokeback Mountain secret. So there was a woman who rented Brokeback Mountain, and somebody figured this out based on the Netflix data, and so she got outed as a lesbian. And then this happened. All right, so that was the end of Netflix Prize 2 because of privacy. All right, so there are all these privacy concerns that we have, and they're growing. I mean, as all of us have these in our pockets. These things are monitoring most of what we do. Your phone knows where you are. It knows who you're talking with. It knows what you're saying to them. There's a lot of issues of what you carry around and what we can measure. So, I think there's a lot of motivation now for why we want to understand privacy. I mean, you have genomic data, you might use drugs or things like this. You have a lot of financial information in your phones, all sorts of things. But there's a lot of benefits potentially from being able to collect the data about you. Maybe this is, we can understand the biological bases of disease. If my watch has a heart rate monitor, right? So maybe by monitoring my heart rate, I can, identify my doctor or something if my heart rate spikes. Maybe I can get better epidemiological control. Maybe I can do better economic policy making. So sort of there's these conflicting things going on here. And this is a thing that that I and my group are trying to work on and understand. There's sort of two goals. One, what are the kind of fundamental trade-offs between privacy and utility, broadly defined? How useful can my data be versus how much privacy can I provide you? And two, sort of part of understanding that is to actually develop optimal and useful algorithms for releasing information or discovering things while protecting privacy of people who, say, carry cell phones or things like this. All right, so the starting point in this, I think, has to be a question of, okay, how do you formulate what it means to be private? And this, there were 50 years of work on this, and probably around 2006 is when this got nailed down. But I'm going to give you kind of 3 plausible definitions of privacy. So, So how do we talk about privacy at all? Well, data comes in, X1 through Xn. So these are like, data of me. So I'm X1, and Jason right here is X2, and Erica is X3, and all of this stuff goes in. It goes into what we'll call a mechanism. So this might be, your hospital who's collecting the data, or Apple, or Google, or whomever. And then they release something. And so this mechanism releases some kind of set of statistics, or models, or whatever it's doing. Okay, so here are some plausible definitions of privacy. Definition 1. All right, whether or not, I participate in a study, or send data in or something like that, the results of the study or the mechanism should be about the same. So then it doesn't matter whether I participated, I have no incentive not to participate because I don't really have much effect. Okay, here's a version based on sort of statistical hypothesis testing. Let's suppose, there's a bad guy sitting there trying to figure out, okay, who's in this database? And let's say the bad guy knows everybody in the study except for the last person. Right? So he literally knows everything. And he's just trying to figure out, was the last person who went in that study me or was it Erica? All right? And that's all he wants to know. We'll say that my mechanism is private if the bad guy can't figure that out or can't figure it out with any reasonable accuracy. So even given kind of the outputs and the results of the study or whatever data is being released, can't figure out who that last person was. It seems you feel pretty safe. Another version of this is, let's suppose I have a 50-50 belief that the last person in the study was either me or it was Yuri, okay? And then after the study completes or after we release our data, actually my beliefs still have to be about 50-50. Like whatever information I get from the results of the study, nothing changes that much. So it turns out all of these things are equivalent or can be made equivalent. The nice thing is this prevents sort of downstream attacks and things like this. Like even if a bad guy knows everything about you and everything about everybody else in the study, he still doesn't get much information when you do the study. All right, so it turns out this is the right definition, and this is the definition that makes all of these things equivalent, and it satisfies all of these. And so what this definition is called differential privacy. What it says is that this mechanism, this way of releasing information is private if the probability that I release anything doesn't change much when I change people in the data set. So basically, I have one data set, which is x1 through xn, and then I change it by, say, swapping one person out, then the probability that the mechanism releases any particular bit of information doesn't change very much. It's bounded by this multiple of e to the epsilon. Yeah, this is, we require a little bit of math to define these things, but it turns out, completely equivalent to everything that we wanted. So that is these three. Whether or not you participate, nothing changes. Bad guys can't test whether you're in the data set, even if they know everything about everybody, or your beliefs can't change very much based on what you observe from the mechanism. So all of these things are equivalent to this definition. So it's a pretty satisfying one. One thing that this definition does is it sort of presumes that there's a trusted curator. So if you're carrying your phone around in your pocket, basically it presumes that you trust whoever gave you the phone and is collecting data on it to sort of aggregate your data safely. There are actually slightly more secure versions of this, but anyway, but there's all sorts of work on developing algorithms under these kind of restrictions. We can estimate histograms, we can estimate rankings, we can do deep learning, kind of. There are all sorts of extensions. There's a ton of research on this in the last, say, 15 years. We can actually have stronger models of privacy, which is, I think, something that we want to be thinking about a little bit, and this is something that we've been working on. So a stronger model of privacy is the following. So, there's me, the statistician or policymaker or whatever it is, the machine learning person, and then there's you, and you have your personal data. And you don't know me from Adam, so you think, okay, I'm not sure I should trust John with my data. He's kind of creepy. So what you might do instead is say, okay, actually, before you even share anything with me, you make it private. You sort of obfuscate your data in some way. All right, and it turns out that this, and then, once you do this, then you're going to feel safe because no matter what I do downstream, you've already kind of guaranteed yourself privacy. And so basically, the definition is completely equivalent. Roughly what I say is that, if Erica is giving me data or Yuri is giving me data, the probability that I can distinguish them based on what they show me is very close to half-half, just random guessing. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate to you the optimal way to actually do this for sort of answering simple questions. So here's a question. Have you ever smoked marijuana? Right? So this was controversial once. I think it's legal in California now. I hope it's legal. My neighbors are constantly baking their house. I'm pretty sure my 4-year-old is high. I don't know. They play a lot of video games over there too. Okay, so have you ever smoked marijuana? And so I don't want to tell you guys this because I don't want you to know whether I've ever smoked marijuana in my life. But what I'm gonna do is I have a die here, okay, 6-sided, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna roll this, and if it's a 1 or a 2, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna answer the question, John, did you eat breakfast this morning? And if it's a 3, 4, 5, or 6, I will answer this question, have I ever smoked marijuana? Okay? And even before I roll the die, I will tell you I ate breakfast this morning because I eat breakfast every morning. Okay, and now I'm going to roll this dice. Remember, 1 or 2, I'm going to answer, did I eat breakfast? 3, 4, 5, or 6, I'm going to answer, have I ever, smoked the kush? Right? I'm like Moses, burning the bush, right? Anyway, all right, so here I go. Okay, yes. All right. So it turns out that if you want to figure out things like the proportion of people who have smoked drugs smoked drugs, done drugs, things like this, drink alcohol, whatever you want, what I just did, that is optimal. There's no other way of doing that will give you better error. So that is provably optimal. That's a result that we've proved. And that's it. Okay, so that's called randomized response. It's actually an old thing designed for surveys, but what we were able to do is show that this is unimprovable. Okay. All right, so, and you can ask me later. I guess one thing is, don't ask me this question multiple times, right? Like, if I have to repeat this, eventually you guys are going to get it nailed down. But, all right, so let me just now tell you a few things about some of the theoretical results we've developed, and then I'll start moving back to more kind of applied things. So, remember that our definition of privacy is that, whether or not the data is X, so that's me, or X prime Erica, the probability that my mechanism releases any particular thing is bounded by this multiple, which is very close to 1, at least for small epsilon. And so you might think, okay, so can we actually do estimation, learning, whatever with this? And it turns out that the answer is, in this case where you're trying to sort of make your data private before anybody else can see it, it gets really hard. And so here's a theorem that we've proved. The theorem is the following. Suppose I want to estimate some d-dimensional quantity. Say the probability that you've done marijuana, cocaine, or a bunch of other drugs. Say I have like d different drugs I care about. It turns out that if you had a non-private procedure that solved this problem and used like a sample of size n, so everybody in this room, well, if you want to do this privately, at least making things private before a curator can see the data, you're going to need d, that's the dimension, or sort of the number of questions you have, divided by epsilon times as much data. All right. So if you think about this, if you've done deep learning or things like this, d, that dimension is something like 1,000,000 or 1 billion. So you're looking at like 1,000,000 to 1 billion times more data than you would require if you didn't care about people's privacy. That's probably hard to do. Takeaway is, don't do local privacy in high dimensions. That's actually going to be impossible. So you can't provide this, at least for most things, except for very simple problems. Although, if you want to, I can tell you how to do it optimally. All right, so now let's move back to central privacy. So now we're going to say, okay, actually, you know what? I trust the people collecting the data because they're my doctor, or it's Google, or it's whomever. So what can we actually do if I trust them, right? Or Apple. Maybe you trust Apple. I don't know. Paid enough money for the phone, I probably should trust them, right? Okay, so what can we do? So there's actually a lot of possibilities. So in 2016, I have some buddies at Google, and they actually showed that you can actually do deep learning with differential privacy if you trust them to collect the data. And so here's the plot. This is they set the privacy parameter to be 2, which is sort of acceptable. And what you see is, okay, this is on a image classification data set. They can get to something like 65% accuracy. This is on CFAR 10. Now, all right, they say we're going to do deep learning with differential privacy. Okay, so if we're being honest, I can extend the graph up, and that blue line up at the top is the state-of-the-art accuracy, which is 95%. So, they're only 30% off of the accuracy you can get. So whether that's a solution is a different question. The US Census Bureau actually is doing differential privacy, and you can do this. And Raj Chetty at Harvard is doing differential privacy to actually try to figure out things like, okay, how do we understand social mobility in different zip codes? And they've tried to make whole maps of, which zip codes actually increase or decrease social mobility. Here, red is decreased social mobility, blue is high social mobility. Okay, they don't actually do differential privacy, but it's close. All right, so I don't have that much time, I think, but let me just, yeah, I don't have that much time. Okay, good. Let me tell you at least one thing that we've done where we can show, okay, this mechanism is really optimal for doing things in differential privacy, because I want to actually develop optimal things to do. So let's suppose I want to calculate some function of a bunch of data. I want to understand, in Salt Lake City, how likely are you to improve, to earn more than your parents? Okay. So it turns out that the right way to do this is slightly complicated, but give me 1 second to explain it. So basically what I'm going to do is ask, okay, you give me this function, and it has some value. And now I want to develop a mechanism that's going to release some other randomized quantity that should be close to the truth as much as possible. So what I define is what I'll call the length function, which is how many people would I have to change in a data set to change the output of the function I want to compute from one thing to another. Right? So if I have to change like 50 people to change the value of the function, well, that's a lot of people I would have to change in a study, so maybe that doesn't matter. It turns out that if you release data with probabilities kind of proportional to this length function, or into the negative length function, this is optimal. Okay? So essentially for any input, like any database you feed it, it's going to maximize the probability of being correct. So this is a result that my student Hilal and I worked out recently. And let me just show you a tiny vignette. So I actually have all of the data on the salaries in the UC system, so University of California system, because it's publicly available and you can creep on your colleagues if you want to. You're like, I wonder if they're getting paid more than I am. The answer is yes. They are. But, so let's suppose I wanted to estimate the median salary in the UC system. And so this blue line is what some researchers who I won't name claimed was the optimal way to do this. Okay? They're like, this is the optimal, this is good. All right, and on this horizontal axis here, I'm plotting the privacy they're providing. So very small numbers, lots of privacy, big numbers, not very much privacy. And their error, if they provide tons of privacy, is something on the order of, what is that, $10 million? Okay, so the median salary is $20,000, so an error of 10 million is probably a little high. And then when they get down here, they're getting an error of something like $10 to the median salary. Okay, if you use the actual optimal mechanism, you're sort of like, oh, I don't know, 4 orders of magnitude better in terms of estimating the median salary at the UC system, which is $20,000. Right? Okay, so this is why optimality matters and why you actually want to be careful. When you say something is optimal, maybe, mean optimal. All right, we had some other results about stochastic optimization, but since I'm out of time, so we have ways to actually, if you wanted to fit a big model across a bunch of, say, phones or something like that, I can tell you how to do that. But I don't want to waste your time too much since we're running a little over and it's break time. You guys probably want coffee. So I'll just finish up with, here's some references if you want to read some papers. Happy to take some questions, talk offline with any of you. Thanks a lot for your attention, and enjoy the coffee break.
You mentioned that randomized response was optimal.
Yeah.
When you say optimal, does it mean that there isn't a better way of doing this? Or does it mean that you can infer nothing from this information?
Oh, I see. Optimal means that you have a particular privacy budget that you've set. You say, okay, I want my privacy to be at this level, all right? And now the question is, for all possible procedures that provide that level of privacy, what will give you the best estimators or the best ability to learn?
So
okay?
it's possible that the level of privacy that's achievable is still not sufficient to meet people's standards, though. Is that fair to say?
Let me try to ask this question back to you to make sure I'm understanding. So you're worried that it won't be providing enough privacy? I think that these mechanisms, I think like you can always set the level to be whatever you want. If you set the level to be 0, which means perfect privacy, basically the data, like what you release is literally independent of the input data, it's just random noise, then you will get perfect privacy. Like, that's it. So you can always, there's always a level that you can set that will be satisfactory. But now the question is, for the given level, can you actually solve the estimation or learning problem that you wanted to solve? And then we can tell you the answer to that, because you can, just calculate, okay, what's my error going to be? And if it's too high, well, maybe you need to trade off on the privacy or something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. No more questions. Okay.
This may be taking us way far out of your talk, but
Sounds good.
okay. In the example, you're using centralized, trusted providers of data.
Yep.
Could you just illustrate the things that we would need to think about in an untrusted environment or untrusted curators?
Yeah. So there are lots of challenges when you have untrusted curators, and so I think that there are a few answers to this. So different companies, Intel, and then there's a few startups, are actually trying to build boxes like computers that provide sort of secure computing environments that will actually, essentially, so then if you trust Intel, then that box can certify that it's running the code and the methods that it says it's running. And so then, whether, whoever owns that box, it's running the code it says it's going to be running, and then you can kind of trust it. So that's like one possibility. Those are still not totally, they're not totally ready to run yet. They're still pretty small, they're not super powerful. They'll get there. So that's one possibility. If you don't even have that, then really the only option you have is basically to do these kind of local privacy things. So basically, I'm gonna, you don't trust me, so before you give me anything, I'm gonna hand you this die. I'm gonna say, okay, here are the two questions, did you eat breakfast this morning? Do you drink alcohol? Now roll the die, and whatever it is, you just answer the question that it tells you to answer. But I won't, I'll close my eyes, I'll turn around, I won't see you roll it. And that's kind of it. That's sort of that's the kind of thing you can do. That's really all you're going to be able to get. I think it's plausible there are hybrid models where you say, and I think you'll see companies moving more towards this, where you sort of say, okay, we'll provide you a little bit of privacy before stuff leaves your phone. We won't provide this full, hardcore differential privacy, but there'll be sort of best practices that can be made a little bit rigorous about what kind of protections they'll provide. And then once they hit the servers, at the company, you'll be hitting either one of these secure boxes or something like that, where they'll be doing serious, centralized hardcore privacy. So I think you'll see these more hybrid models coming in the next 2, 3, 1, I don't know how many years, 6 months beats me. But I think we'll see more and more of this as we go on.